All right, you want to get started?
I'm ready.
Okay, recording, and we are live on YouTube. All right, thanks everybody for joining us. My name is Harrison Schmidt, and I'm the Programs Director at Pacific Whale Foundation. The mission of the Pacific Whale Foundation is to protect the oceans through science and advocacy and to inspire environmental stewardship. I am really excited to be joined by my colleague today, Jens Curry, who is our chief scientist at the Pacific Whale Foundation, to talk about the research program, the impact that his researchers have had over the past year, and also some of the things that he's really looking forward to in the future. As many of you know, we are a social enterprise venture. And as a result of the current pandemic, our boats are currently off the water. So we are wholly dependent upon the support of really passionate individuals such as yourself. I want to encourage you, if what you hear today inspires you and you would like to be a part of it, I want to encourage you to visit us at our website, pacificwhale.org, and also join us at our Facebook page. We are currently conducting a $5 fundraiser. We are very much in business and have every intention of continuing to be so, but we are reliant upon member support. So please join us. And I also want to encourage you to submit questions. Once Jens and I have just an initial conversation, we really want to open it up to your questions and have this conversation be as interactive as possible. So thanks again for joining us. And Jens, great to see you again.
Yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity here to go down memory lane and reflect back on 2019.
Excellent. So before we get started on the program, I'd love to just learn a little bit more about you. What inspired you to become a scientist, and what inspired you to come work for Pacific Whale Foundation?
Yeah, great question. So, growing up, my parents always supported me in what I was interested in, but they also took me on my first whale watches down on the east coast of Canada in a province called Nova Scotia, the Bay of Fundy, for those of you that might know. I grew up very close to that. And anytime somebody came from out of town, we would take them to do some whale watching. And that's really where I first saw my first marine mammal, and where the interest in marine life and this career that I have now really started. And just growing up in an area like Nova Scotia, where you have some of the largest tidal ranges in the world, we're talking about 50 feet, it just gives you a real appreciation for the power of nature and how we're connected to it. And so that really is what started my interest and my career to where I am today. But what many of you may not know, my passions are actually driven on the data side of things. So I started out, this career really looking at data. And, what I really love doing is seeing what the data can tell us about a particular problem or a particular species. So don't get me wrong, I love going out in the field and having those great encounters. But, for me, what really gets me excited is seeing what we found, data we can use to drive certain conservation measures and better understand a species or a problem.
And what's an example of some data you've collected in the past that has informed better management, either here at PWF or elsewhere?
Yeah, so one of the first projects I had at Pacific Whale Foundation was trying to answer the question of what speed should we travel at when whales are present here in Maui Nui. And there's general guidelines of 15 knots, but there was no science or data to back that up. So we spent nearly 4 years running transects and looking how the encounter distance with whales changed with different speeds. And we're able to use that data to model what the safest speed to operate is when you're around whales. And we looked at some various time components as well, since we're dealing with whales that come and go throughout the season. And, so we have different speed guidelines, based on the time of year, which is related to the number of whales that are present. So in January, February, and March, all of the pack whale eco cruises travel at 12.5 knots, and that is the recommended speed based on the best available data we have that individuals should be traveling when they're transiting the waters in Maui Nui during that peak whale season. But anytime whales are about, it's a good idea to slow down, and so we do recommend 15 in December and April as well.
That is amazing. And this might be really difficult to calculate, but do you have any sense of the number of whales that this new guidance has helped to protect from collision or mortality?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, it's still being monitored. So there's still data being collected on the frequency and rate of collisions that are reported voluntarily, as well as those that we see in the field. And I have an interesting story later as we reflect back on some things that we've noticed and some of the data we're actually able to use to inform how effective the speed limit might be. But at this point, it's impossible to answer, but the data is being collected so we can look at a pre and a post um, uh, frequency of these strikes or encounters. Yeah.
Well, I really want to dig into all of that in a lot more depth, but I've allowed us to get a little bit ahead of ourselves. I guess first it might be helpful to just provide a description of what the research program does. You started to talk about a specific study, but just at kind of a high level, what's the purpose of you and of your program and your team?
Yeah. So, I mean, the program, starting at the end is it's trying to find that data or that information, that research that can lead to management decisions or conservation of a particular species. And we do that by doing a combination of both short-term and long-term research. So we do have catalogs of species that span a 40-year period. But while we're collecting data on that, we do various short-term, high-impact studies that put our resources in areas where they're needed and can have the most impact for a particular issue, cause, or species. And so currently we're running 10 different programs in Australia, across Australia, Ecuador, and of course here in Hawaii. And we're focusing on specifically tourism impacts, vessel traffic, as well as marine debris and various biological parameters around different populations that utilize those study areas. The end goal of all this research is to get it into a peer-reviewed journal or article, and that can then be used to inform or guide policy and conservation measures.
Mhm. And so, as a science-based organization, the work that you and your team do is really foundational for us. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how your work interacts with our other core programmatic areas, including education and conservation.
Yeah, so I think, it's safe to say that we try and start everything with sound data and sound science and information. And so that's where the research component comes in. But we truly do need all the programs working together to get a message across or to effectively act on some data or findings that we have. And on the education and outreach component, we have the education department that comes in and takes the science and translates it into messages for various age groups. So through from our keiki all the way up to adults and the like. So it's digesting that scientific information into sound bites that are useful and understandable for the general public to act on. And then the conservation side of things are when we want that action. When our data shows action is needed, there's some conservation measures that are missing. We can then use the conservation program to sort of guide those policies that we want to have taken to the next level.
Mhm. That's really one of my favorite things about Pacific Whale Foundation is that with our core programmatic areas, we really approach this issue holistically. One of the things I was very excited about just last week is that the Maui County Council unanimously approved a ban on single-use plastic foodware. Your research has shown that it is the leading cause of pollution on our beaches and on our shores. But one of my favorite parts is that the core part of our testimony was based on the research reports that you did. So we are able to take all of the data that you collect and the analysis you perform, and then feed that directly into policy debates that will then have an impact. So that's just another example, I think, of how fantastic it is that you all work so closely together.
Yeah, no, it's always nice when everything aligns up and you can follow through from start to finish. Some
Mhm.
things certainly take a lot longer, and research and science and policy is the long game. But it's
Mhm.
nice that governments are acting at a faster rate when it comes to marine debris,
Mhm.
particularly Hawaii, where we're so isolated. We should be leading by example, having minimal resources available, being so disconnected from the mainland. So there's no reason that we shouldn't fast track all this policy around marine debris on our coast. So yeah, really happy to hear that that went through and that we're able to provide the data needed to show that if you implement this, we're going to see this amount of reduction in debris on our beaches
Mhm.
immediately.
So the question that I get asked most often about the research program, and that I've been asking myself a few times since I'm still new, is the whale catalog. This is this incredible project that's been going on for, if I'm not mistaken, decades. What is the whale catalog, and how are you using the information in it to advance conservation?
Yeah, it's a good question. So for me, it's all about baseline data. So, we need to prepare for the unknown. And so we're living in a time of very much uncertainty around fisheries, uncertainty around climates, uncertainty around oceans, and uncertainty around human induced stressors, if you will. And so we're not going to know there was an impact unless we know something ahead of time or pre some impact. So, in a time of uncertainty, it's very important that you maintain baseline levels of data so you're not looking at impacts and trying to figure out or piece it back together on, is that really different from what it used to be? And only with these long-term continuous data sets can you truly compare a before and an after, or a pre-impact and a post-impact. So it's all about maintaining that continuity to be able to inform how impactful a new stress or a new threat might be for a particular species, in this case, humpback whales.
Mhm. And I know it varies considerably based on the type of research you're doing, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you collect this data. So BWF has a research vessel and a permit. Um, uh,
Yeah.
Residents may have seen us out there with the yellow flag. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what they're doing and the different kinds of ways that you all collect this information.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do have a dedicated research vessel called Ocean Protector, and so we're out there protecting the oceans as best we can. We try and surveys 50 to 60 days per year, or survey days per year, and that varies. We've gone up to hundreds of survey days in a given year on those higher years where we're trying to collect more data. And so we're collecting data on essentially any species that we see, any marine mammal that we see. And so, a permit covers over 18 different whales and dolphin species that we could encounter. Mainly, we're encountering humpback whales during whale season, bottlenose dolphins, spotted dolphins, spinner dolphins, and false killer whales. The false killer whale is a really important one because it's, the endangered species here in the Hawaiian Islands. It is the insular Hawaiian Island population of false killer whales. So it's just that population, but it's a population that utilizes the area that we research fairly regularly. So we always get excited when we do see that particular species. And the basis for all of this is photo identification. Again, coming back to having those long-term data sets, it's about where are the whales and or dolphins, and who are the whales and dolphins. And the who comes from photo identification. So for whales, we photo ID the flukes or the underside, and that's unique to each individual. And for dolphins, we photograph those dorsal fins, and that's unique to each individual. So the nicks and the notches along those identifying features are what we use to identify the individuals. And with that, we can build up long-term sighting histories of individual whales and individual dolphins. But we also want to look at the population as a whole. And so in addition to the photo identification, we're looking at the abundance and distribution of different species, how they interact with stressors, for example, marine debris or vessel traffic, and also looking at using some new technologies to help get information that was not possible 5 to 10 years ago. So we've started using drones or unmanned aerial vehicles to measure whales and dolphins. And so this humpback whale work we started with or partnered with the University of Hawaii's Marine Mammal Research Program, and they really were instrumental in helping us get started in this. So big shout out and thank you to our collaborators over there for sure. And we're starting to use that technology now on some of the smaller species, so the dolphin species. And we're a little bit at the forefront there in that we're some of the first ones to start collecting aerial UAV footage of dolphins here in the Maui region and seeing what we can glean from that data.
Mhm. And as any guest on our Pacific Whale Eco Adventure knows, the 100% of the profits from that trip goes to fund the kind of research that you all are doing. But there's also another way that our trips with guests on them are helping with the data collection. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about Researcher on Board.
Yeah, for sure. So, we want to take people out and we want to educate them. So that's what Pac Whale Eco Adventure Cruises do. But in addition to that, we can use these platforms as opportunistic methods of collecting data. And so we shorten that to POPs, or platforms of opportunity. And so we have research assistants that go out and they collect photo identification of humpback whales during whale season. And so 5 days a week, we have researchers on those vessels collecting identification photos of humpback whales, as well as documenting interactions with humans through, unhealthy looking individuals or ones that potentially have scars from vessel strikes. And so when we have the photos out on the water almost 365 days a year, we're able to monitor at a much larger scale. Now it's a much broader scope, and so you can't get at those specific questions, but it's extremely valuable in maintaining continuity in your sampling throughout the whole whale season. Understanding the research department is a small team. We have a dedicated research for that vessel. We go out as much as we can, but we can supplement that with opportunistic platforms. And that's really where the Researcher on Board program comes into play. And in addition to that, I'm really excited to talk about Whale and Dolphin Tracker, which is an app that we use to log essentially the species, the location of that species, and the size of the particular group that they've encountered, and link that up with the survey effort or the vessel track. And with those 4 streams of data, we're actually able to make a lot of deductions on the spatial use or the area use of species that we encounter regularly in the waters here in Maui Nui. And so, that program has experienced monumental success. And at this point, we have over 100,000 GPS positions of whales and dolphins that have been encountered in the Maui Nui region over the last 20 years.
So I want to talk some more about those successes, given all of the incredible work that you and your team are doing. What have been some of the areas of highest impact just over the past year?
Yeah, so this past year has been busy as far as sharing our science, and so we were fortunate enough to attend 4 different conferences. We attended the International Whaling Commission meetings in Kenya. We attended the Marine Mammal Commission meetings here in Hawaii. We attended the World Whale Conference in Australia, and finally attended a really big marine mammal conference called the World Marine Mammal Conference, which took place in Spain. And through that, we were able to share the research that Pacific Whale Foundation was doing, share that with the largest scientific community, and build on collaborations and partnerships at an international level. And so that's really important as we move forward, because science really needs to become more collaborative, and we can only do that by building these partnerships and sharing our science through these conferences and workshops. We're also able to publish 3 peer-reviewed publications, so that's science and data that's now available to move further the conservation goals of those particular studies. And now there's a reference there for the conservation department, for example, or the education department to use and incorporate into the pack whale side, as well as advocacy and action as well.
Mm-hmm. And so you mentioned the opportunity for more collaboration amongst international scientists. Are there some collaborations that came out of those meetings that you're particularly excited about now?
Yeah, for sure. So, it's always about building new relationships. So we're excited to have developed some new partnerships in Australia for some of the work going forward there. We've certainly built on a lot of the collaborations we've had, and these are opportunities for organizations that we're already partnering with to come together. So I do want to, acknowledge a few of those since we brought it up, and definitely want to acknowledge the Marine Mammal Research Program at University of Hawaii, as well as the Hilo campus at the University of Hawaii, and then of course Cascadia Research Collective, who we've partnered with on a lot of our photo identification data, the Hawaiian Islands Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary as well, for working closely together on some of those entanglement responses and looking at some of those impacts of marine debris. I'm definitely going to forget some people, and so apologize. You're all equally appreciated, and certainly is required for us to do the work we're doing and to have it at the scope and the scale that we're carrying it out.
So I want to transition to, if we did a look back, I want to transition to a look ahead. But before we do, I just want to remind all of our viewers that we really encourage you to submit questions on the chat line. We'd like to be able to answer as many of those as you can. So feel free to type those in, and we will make a point of answering those once we conclude in a couple of minutes. So looking ahead, given that you've got this good baseline of work that you've been doing, what excites you most about the research program in the next year or two? What are some up and coming projects? Maybe you've been involved in them already, or they could be potentially new, but what excites you the most about the next year or two?
Yeah, so I mean, there has been a big push at, in the research department to start looking at some global threats and some global impacts. So I'm really excited to start digging into that and see where Pacific Whale Foundation's resources can be used to push the needle in the favor of species that truly need additional efforts and additional help. So it's identifying those issues and finding a space where Pacific Whale Foundation can assist and move forward. And I do like the data side of things, but I'm always looking forward to going in the field and seeing what kind of encounters we have. And you never truly know what kind of encounter you're going to have. And I'm saying this because I want to sneak in a really neat video that we captured in 2019 of a whale mugging. And so if those of you who don't know what a whale mugging is, it's when a whale comes. Let me share my screen here. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. This is taken from a drone. Credit out to Martin, who was the pilot on this one. You'll see me running around frantically with a GoPro, trying to capture the underwater footage. But a mugging is when a whale holds the vessel hostage, meaning it's not really safe to maneuver out of there because they're within close range. And for commercial vessels, that means within 100 yards here in Hawaii, you're not allowed to engage your engines. We do have some of those restrictions lifted under our research permits, but when you get an encounter like this, you just kind of got to let it go and see what happens. And so we were with this humpback whale for almost 30 to 40 minutes, where it just went from one side of the vessel to the other. And you can really get a scale of this subadult that was here, very curious, popping up left and then popping up right. And you can really just see the boat people shifting to the side that the whale is on and just really enjoying this. And so this was in the 2019 season. We're out there collecting data on the body condition of humpback whales. So, the point of flying this drone over top is to get measurements of that humpback whale's size, so both width and length, and then get an idea of the body condition of that individual. And look how that body condition changes over time as they complete this very energetically demanding migration between Hawaii and Alaska. And coming back to the impact of that, it's important that we know that so we can see if various threats that might be introduced over time are impacting the body condition and overall health of the population and individuals. And I could play this video for forever, but I think you guys get the point. It was just an amazing experience. And just to close it out, and for those who aren't jealous enough already, I'm going to go ahead and show you what that looks like underwater. So if everybody can see the screen still. Harrison, that's good.
Mine is, I can hear it, but mine is frozen on the last image.
Okay, let me just.
So just while we're figuring this out, Jens, this isn't a scientific question, but what in the world was going through your mind as you witnessed this?
It was just,
I see it now.
Tell me if you can see it now.
Yeah, good to go.
Yeah, so it's one of those rare experiences that you hope for when you're out there, and you always wonder when you see a whale approach your vessel if they're going to come and interact with you for a longer period of time. And so many emotions going through, just an awe of the size and magnitude of the species, but also how gentle and how aware it is of the space around it. It was within, I want to say, centimeters of the vessel, but always knew exactly where the vessel was, never came in contact with any of it, and just sort of danced, if you will, with the vessel for, again, 30 to 40 minutes. And so it was phenomenal, really exciting, and one of those rare opportunities of what you look forward to, coming back to the question of what you look forward to. I look forward to another day like this where you can literally look into the eye of a humpback whale. And, as the founder of the organization said, someone's home when you look in the humpback whale's eyes. Really, really great experience there.
I'm amazed by how big they are, but also how agile they are.
Yeah, exactly. So, they're big and robust, but they're certainly impacted by, things that individuals do, the very basic level, but as well as the human population. So, we need to be very mindful of our everyday activities, because they do have an impact, and then collectively as a whole, we do need to come together to receive action.
So I have one more question for you, Jens, and then we'll go to questions from our audience. And for folks who are listening, if you haven't submitted a question for Jens and you would like to, now is your opportunity. Please go ahead and submit those, and we'll answer them right after this. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about key stressors to whales and dolphins. This is picking up on the point you made before about collaboration. So obviously, there are no shortage of threats, but one of the biggest ones is climate change and warming ocean temperatures as a result of human-caused emissions. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the current research study you're doing in collaboration with others to begin to understand what this means for humpback whales in our region.
Yeah, for sure. So, we presented on this at the Maui Ocean Center. It was a joint presentation because this project is collaborative across Hawaii and Alaska. And so lots of organizations were present there. But the whole reason this was sparked was in the 2014-15 whale season, there was a sudden decline in sightings. So, nobody was doing abundance estimates, so we can't say that, the population decreased, but there was a noticeable change in the sightings. And so it sort of prompted the question of what caused that change in the sighting rate. And one of the theories or potential explanations is, there was a change in the food source of the humpback whales when they're down in Alaska, and therefore were unable to make that migration. And so this project is really all about answering how much energy do they need to make that migration, and how much energy do they use throughout that migration. So you got to imagine they're traveling from Alaska to Hawaii and then back to Alaska again without feeding. So they need a pretty good store of food to make that. And so if we link that back to climate and oceans, and you have changing ocean temperatures, that really starts to impact, the primary producers, so that zooplankton and the phytoplankton. And, that's really what feeds the entire ocean system is that basic plant life that starts, and changing ocean currents, changing ocean temperatures can really mess with that and skew it. And so we see things changing, and species might be slower to adapt to that. And that's when you start to see some impacts and some effects. And so this project, again, is focusing on what is the energetic cost to do that migration? How does it differ across cohorts? So for example, mother calves need a lot more energy because they're raising that calf, but how is that compared to, males in competition, which is also very energetically demanding? And once we know that, we can begin to say, well, if they don't have this energy to start in Alaska, well, they're not going to be physically able to make that migration. And if we know how much energy they need, we know how much food they need. And so then we can start addressing fisheries concerns, for example. And then if we can be sustainable on the fisheries side of things, then things that we can't immediately control for, such as climate change, we can start addressing that issue, but buying us a little bit of time to not see the drastic impacts we potentially could if we continue, under the current trajectories.
Great. We have a question from a member of our audience on key stressors. And the question is, during this unprecedented time of decreased ocean use and vessel traffic, do you have any personal observations about changes in whale behavior, or is anyone doing any work looking at this unique environment on these animals?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's one that we've talked about extensively here. Some important things to note at this point. Tourism vessels are the only vessels that have been stopped from operation. So we still have, and cruise lines, sorry. So we still have, the tugs that are servicing all the islands transiting through the regions here, and we still have fishing vessels transiting through the regions here. And so to sort of look at the feasibility of answering that question, we had some of our citizen scientists do some surveys of humpback whales during this time, and they were actually still seeing vessels with humpback whales, even though there was no tourism vessels out there and no cruise ships out there. So to truly have a baseline of no sound in the ocean or no impact in the ocean as it relates to vessel traffic, isn't fair to state at this time. There has been a change, and it would be very interesting to look at, but it's difficult to quantify in any meaningful way, since it's not a complete cessation of ocean noise, because you still have fisheries vessels going out and you still have tugs servicing the islands.
Okay. Jens Curry, Chief Scientist, excuse me, at the Pacific Whale Foundation. Thank you so much for talking this through and for sharing those incredible videos. Thank you all to our audience members for joining us. If what you heard inspires you, please join us at pacificwhale.org. We are currently conducting a $5 fundraiser. We want to keep this work continuing, and we are reliant upon your support and others who are just as passionate about whales and dolphins as we are. So please join us, sign up for our email list, or you can find us on Facebook, where we'll be posting this video and a number of other incredible images of whales and dolphins that our researchers have encountered throughout their work. Thanks,
okay,
Jens.
yeah, I'd just like to close with, if you want to get to learn more about the research department, we're having a live Q&A on Friday. So tune in for that. You'll see me and my colleague, Stephanie Stack. You can ask us anything you want.
Excellent. Looking forward to it, Jens. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you. Have a good one.